My name is Kimi Brown, and here is my UROP presentation titled Shakespearean Support Group. To be or not to be? Is that really the question? Is our humanity really that confusing? For centuries, people from different backgrounds and cultures and lifestyles have come to the same question and have yet to find an answer. Why are we here? And if we don't even know why we're here, what is the point of ethical living? What is the point of being a good person? What is the point of our existence? Something that I learned from my 22 years of living life on this earth is that life is hard. I know, big shocker. And something that made my life really difficult was my mental health. Ever since I was a kid, I always struggled with it, but I was always able to just be positive and push through until my junior year of college, when it got to be too hard and my mental health started affecting my everyday life and keeping me from doing the things and living the life that I wanted to live. So I decided to go to therapy. And you know what? Therapy was great. It was really awesome, and it really helped me out in so many different ways. Woohoo! Therapy taught me a ton about my mental health, but it also taught me tools and tricks for how to manage it. But that still didn't change the fact that life is still difficult. So now what? Now what do you do when you're given all this information and are also currently overwhelmed with your current mental health status? Well, at this time while I was struggling, I discovered a TV show by Mike Schur called The Good Place. And if you don't know what The Good Place is, you have to check it out because it is an incredible show and it kind of changed my life. It's a show exploring the potential of what happens to us after we die, that there's a good place and a bad place. And while exploring this really wacky plot, there are really funny characters, and it's also oddly very educational. As a musical theater performer, actor, writer, and director, I had to ask myself, why did this TV show, The Good Place, affect me so much? Well, objectively, I started looking at the facts of The Good Place. It's a show with very well-written and identifiable characters that are very wacky, but also very honest and real. A way that you could empathize with these storylines because of who these people were. And it was very riveting and well-written in a way that's like you couldn't really expect the next thing that was going on. And it was hilarious, and on top of that, very heartfelt. But the biggest thing that made this show so impactful was that it was a very non-threatening way of addressing super real and challenging issues. It was a non-threatening platform that allows audiences to look at what is happening and really absorb the information that is being explored and really ask along with the characters the questions that are being asked in the show. So then this got me thinking, is there a way that I could maybe do the same thing? How could I follow Mike Schur's footsteps and create a platform where I could explore the topics and issues that I'm very passionate about, which is mental health? Mental health needs more exposure in our media because it needs to be normalized and it needs to be talked about. So how could I create something where I could give people a space to think about it? So as a theater major, I thought, why don't I write a play? But as we learned from The Good Place, a story is nothing without its character. So as I was thinking about who to put in my play, I wanted them to be characters that audiences didn't have to spend time trying to figure out or trying to recognize. I wanted recognizable, easily identifiable characters that had histories already with them so that the point of the show could be made known. That the point of the show is not necessarily the craziness that has happened to you, but what you do about it and how you deal with it. So I started thinking about the stories that I have read with characters that have gone through crazy, insane things. And you know, the first person I thought of was Shakespeare. And if you think about his stories and the things that actually happen in them, it would be insane to expect anybody to be able to survive or keep existing after the shows because they deal with so much tragedy, so much drama, so many extreme circumstances and conflicts and relationships. It's not a pretty thing to read, and it's not a pretty thing to watch a lot of the time. So I started thinking about the characters that were left at the end of the shows, the ones that were left to survive. How would they deal with their past experiences? Shakespeare's stories are filled with drama and trauma. Thus, The idea for my play was born. So I was going to use Shakespeare characters to address mental health in our day and age. The ideas I had were Shakespeare characters in a support group about being Shakespeare characters. But was it just going to start out of the blue? Was I going to have anything else to do? How was I going to start this? Well, The Good Place rooted everything in philosophy, and I had learned a ton about philosophy through this TV show, philosophical things that I could use in my own life, and that actually helped me learn and grow. So I thought, well, why don't I start with philosophy? Maybe philosophy is the secret answer to all of our mental health problems, and I just didn't know about it. So I decided to try and research as much philosophy as I could and find philosophers that I thought could maybe contribute to the content of my play. I went to Plato, Aristotle, Anselm, Aquinas, Descartes, Hobbes, Locke, Hume, Kant, Mill, Nietzsche, Wittgenstein, Sartre, and Dewey. So I learned a lot of things, and every time I would learn about a new philosophy, I would get very excited or I would get very intrigued, and then I'd read about the next philosopher, and then it would just be a completely different thing. They were all always trying to sort of out philosophy one another. They were trying to find the most solid, clear answers that were applicable in every situation all the time. That made everything really, really hard. See how things could get confusing? It seems as though in a desire to make life more understandable and simple and direct, it made things more difficult and confusing in relationship to our specific lives and also mentally. Sure, there are so many different philosophies like idealism and realism, determinism, utilitarianism, existentialism, hedonism, and all these things where different philosophers are talking about the goal in life is your duty to one another, or the goal in life is pleasure and happiness, or the goal in life is to be a virtuous man and live the best life that you can be so you can serve the world that you live in. And that's all good and well, and if it helps you, it helps you, but it didn't talk about mental health. None of these philosophers studied mental health or what happens when you're depressed or what happens when you're overly anxious or when you have bipolar disorder or what happens when you are struggling to get out of bed and simply just stay alive. So with that in mind, I decided that I should be going to the people, my colleagues, my friends, or the people around me and ask about their specific mental health journeys. I decided that I should talk to people who are going through it now. So I began conducting personal interviews. I first sent out a post on social media explaining my project. I gathered willing participants, and then I sent out a questionnaire and a sign-up sheet, and then before I knew it, I was interviewing people about their mental health journeys. The questionnaire included questions such as, what is your relationship with mental health? What's your relationship with therapy? Have you ever gone to group therapy? Do you think therapy is helpful? What I learned from these interviews was completely mind-blowing. Not only were people incredibly vulnerable, but they were incredibly willing to share with me their personal experiences. And it was so eye-opening to know that people were so hungry and thirsty for exposure and awareness of mental health. Although these personal stories were so fantastic to hear and so incredible, they didn't really teach me a lot about mental health objectively. I realized that I didn't know as much about mental health as I thought I did, so I needed to go learn the facts. I decided to start conducting professional interviews. I reached out to the University of Utah Counseling Center and asked if any of them would be interested in being interviewed for this project. All the people I talked to were credited psychologists and therapists with proper education and varying degrees of specialties. What I learned from them was that there is no right answer. There is no one way to live life. There are no quick fixes. And I learned that therapy is not a place that you go to find answers or to fix your life easy peasy lemon squeezy. Therapy is just a safe space created for you to explore your life and the different thoughts and experiences that you've had. It is an incredibly helpful thing when the person you are talking to is a credited, unbiased person who is focused on the same goals as you to help you get better. These are some of the things that I learned. That genetics do play a role, but not in the way that you think. Sure, you can be genetically predisposed to a certain mental health condition, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get it. Your parents could have depression, but you could end up not getting it, or your parents could not have depression and you can get it. It's not as easy to trace, and it's not as simple to identify. I also learned the difference between disorders and tendencies, how you could have depressive tendencies but not necessarily have depression. Same thing with a lot of other mental health conditions. The importance of a diagnosis is that it's really for you, because you define a disorder as something when it stops you from living the life that you want to do, where it starts affecting you day to day. That's when you would have a disorder. And so a diagnosis is helpful because then you can identify it and then you can start doing something about it, like get maybe medication if you'd like. Because medication is great. A lot of people kind of scared me out of medication and made me so afraid of it because of how medication used to be like in the 70s. But now science has evolved so much that medication is really easy to get on, really easy to get off. And it's also just something that you can do for you. It's not needed unless you want it. Trauma is a real thing and you gotta deal with it because our bodies are adapted by nature. So when traumatic things happen, our bodies will physically change and adjust to it in order to survive. Sometimes we are aware of it and can trace it, but sometimes we're not. And it's really interesting because two people could have the exact same experiences objectively and go through the exact same lives and still turn out completely different. That is why mental health is so complicated. It's not easy to follow and it's not easy to identify because it's so based on who you are as a person. The human condition is so varied and so unpredictable, and it's important to find a therapist that works for you. Because you could go to any therapist, but if you don't get along with them, you're not going to get better. And also, there's so many different ways of addressing your mental health through talk therapy, cognitive therapy, exposure therapy. There's so many different ways of addressing it. You need to decide what works for you. So after studying with these therapists, I went back to the books and I started rereading the plays and tracking these characters and really looking at the events that happened to them that could potentially affect them. We start with Benvolio from Romeo and Juliet. His best friend kills himself and then his other best friend is killed. We have Horatio from Hamlet, who is the sole survivor of the murders in Denmark, who is forced to stay alive to carry on the story of his best friend, who was killed. We have Miranda from The Tempest, who is taken from her life and civilization, forced to live on an island with a father and the slave who tried to rape her. And then, the first man that she sees when she's 14 years old, her father tricks her into falling in love with him and then marrying him for his political gain. We have Rosalind from As You Like It, who is exiled from her kingdom along with her father, and she is forced to hide her identity, otherwise she will be killed. She pretends to be a man, and she also tries to find love and tries to have a happy life, but, you know, there's only a lot that you can do when you are literally being hunted. We have Helena from A Midsummer's Night Dream, who fell in love with a man who then denied her and then continuously abused her physically and mentally, because he didn't think that she was beautiful enough. Of course, he fell in love with her at the end due to a magic spell, but that's kind of messed up. And then we have Fleance from Macbeth. Although he is a small character, he was the son of Banquo, who was killed, and Fleance was also supposed to be killed because he was a threat to Macbeth as a potential future heir to the kingdom. But Fleance escapes and survives at the age of 10. That's got to do something to you. Here comes the fun part, the writing of the play. It took a lot of trial and error, but after a while, the play was formed. The basic plot of it is that these characters come together and come to this support group about their specific Shakespearean traumas. As the play progresses, we have flashbacks of each character and their individual therapy sessions, thus exploring their personal experiences and the traumas that have happened in their plays before. And of course, it's funny, it's wacky, there's funny interactions, but then also it gets very heartfelt and it gets very realistic because the things that they deal with, I tried to look at through a very realistic lens of how it would affect them as human beings and young adults. This project taught me a lot of things such as life is very complicated and it's a never-ending journey of learning. As Dewey taught us, the joy in being alive is in learning, but it's not restricted to academic pursuits. We need to learn how to be human beings. I believe the answer to humanity's existence is that there are no answers. Maybe you believe in a God, or maybe you don't believe that there's deeper meaning to life. But the more you learn, the richer your life becomes. The biggest thing we can do is honor our personal and intellectual inclinations and try and make something of it. Try to create something that matters, whether it's academic pursuits or art or families. During this hard time where things seem even bleaker than normal, what I have learned is that we just need to try to keep living and to keep existing, and what we do with the in-between is up to us. Thank you so much for watching.